I have a double parsha that we will read this Shabbat, the parshiot of Tazria and Mitzorah, and wanted to talk a little bit about some of the ideas. Obviously, it's we're at the point where parshiot that oftentimes are a little complex for us to understand, and unless you're a dermatologist, and then you find this stuff very, very intriguing. But the Tazria doesn't start with the tzarat, with the, we'll call it for lack of a better translation, we'll discuss a little more leprosy, but rather a woman who gives birth and the paradox of birth, right? What does it say? Isha ki tazria, vitama shivat yamim. And later, she has to bring a carbon, and she is purified through from makor dameha, from the source of her blood. That's what happens. And this is the paradox of childbirth in Jewish life. A woman becomes ritually impure, which feels in many ways counterintuitive. It's the most life-affirming idea, not just idea, it's the most life-affirming thing a person can do is to bring a new life into the world. And Tumah, we have to understand this, Tumah is not about sin. It's about an encounter with the boundaries of life and death. Birth brings life, but also brings vulnerability. It brings blood. It brings a brush with mortality. Birth also, right? It brings it's thank God less dangerous today, but it was very dangerous childbirth way back when. And so holiness in the Torah is not just celebration of life, but awareness of its fragility. So a person becomes, right? This woman becomes tameh, not because she did anything wrong, but because she is coming close to death. And that's the idea here of childbirth. That's why she becomes tameh. And it's almost, there's a little bit of it's almost like it's akin to a sin because she is coming close to death and putting herself into a dangerous situation. Might not be the right words, putting herself into, but you understand. So that's the paradox a little bit of birth early on in Parshat Tazria and the Tuma involved. Now, in that with that Tuma, there are different times based upon the gender as to how long the woman is tameh. After a boy is born, there's 7 days of Tuma plus 33 days for a total of 40 days. After the birth of a daughter, it's 14 days of Tuma, followed by 66 more days for a total of uh, of of 80 days. Now, the Torah doesn't really explain to us as to why that is, and there are different interpretations that are given. There are those who try to explain that a baby girl carries the potential to create future life. So her birth represents a more intense encounter with this fragility. Right? I had this baby, and it's a girl, and there's certainly a possibility that in the future she's going to go into the same thing. So this brush with life and its loss or its limitation is seen as having sort of a stronger effect. That's one way of understanding as to why then it becomes the uh, the 80 days. There are others who try to give explanation that has to do with biological realities, and we don't know. I don't think that this is the truth, but it was maybe understood, believed this way in the Middle Ages, that recovery after giving birth to a female may have been observed as something that was longer or or different. I don't know if that was something that was believed, but there are others who tried to give in a different idea, and then one sort of one last idea together with it, sort of a psychological idea. In the ancient world, the birth of a girl usually carried with it much greater long-term anxiety. There are much more worries about marriage for the girl, her vulnerability, her social status. Now, it's true, of course, for a boy and a girl, but a woman back then was much more dependent upon being in a marriage, being in a home. And so the extended period may reflect a deeper emotional, psychological transition the mother. The Torah is acknowledging sort of this human reality. It's not a value judgment, but the human reality at the time as to how difficult it may have been for the woman, and thus she has the 14 days and the 66 days for the total of the 80 days as opposed to the 40 days. Okay, but either way, this is again fragility of life, the tumah that comes after the birth of a child. Okay, now most of Tazria and Mitzvah are, of course, about tzaraat, this skin disease, which we translate as being leprosy. We don't really have a good translation. Adam ki yeh ba'or bisaro, right? When a person has some sort of a skin affliction, we know the Kohen goes and the Kohen has to examine and declare the impurity. Now, it can be in three different ways. It can be on the body, it can be on the clothing, and it can be on the house. Now, of all these things, when we talk about sarad, it's important to point out that this is not regular medical leprosy. This was some sort of spiritual condition. Who was the diagnoser? It wasn't a doctor. It was the Kohen. Now, you can, of course, have a Kohen who is a doctor, but it's not specific that it was a doctor or a medical professional. It was a priest. It was a Kohen. And it can appear on, again, skin, clothing, even on houses. And what's interesting, just generally about the idea is the Torah externalizes inner moral spiritual issues. It makes them visible and communal in some ways. That's what the Torah is doing here. Now, very often that's not done publicly. And I don't know if there's sort of a way to understand as to when it's done publicly and when it's not. We talked prior to Pesach, when we were talking about the Karban Chatat, how the Karban Chatat is done in the same place as the Karban Olah, and Kol Mashiach Taset Olah, Taset Chatat. It's in order to hide the identity of the sinner. Somebody sins, and they're going, or a person's giving a Karban in that area. Well, if they're in that area of the Beit Hamikdash, that corner, are they bringing a Karban Chatat, a sin offering? They're bringing a Karban Olah. They're just bringing an offering to God, which has nothing to do with sin. We don't know who they are. We hide their identity. So in some ways, when it comes to having people repent, the Torah is very, very good at hiding the identity to not keep people from repenting. But here with Tzarat, it's seen as being so um, maybe such a terrible sin that it actually makes the stain visible and and communal. And a lot of that has been people have connected that with lashon hara. We oftentimes think of tzaraat as being a punishment for lashon hara. We have tzarat is punishments for in other areas. We learned the story about the Gehazi, the student of Elisha, who gets tzarat as a punishment for what he does in trying to claim, trying to get Naaman, who had Sarat, trying to get him to give him gifts and whatnot when Elisha refused to take anything from him. Now, there was the Sarat from the general that went on to Elisha's sort of student, Gehazi, but he it wasn't for speaking Lashon Hara. We think of Lashon Hara as the punishment for Tzarat because, of course, Miriam, the case where Miriam speaks ill of her brother Moshe and his new wife, whether that's the second wife, whether that's the same wife, and does Moshe think he's better than any of the rest of us? And she gets tzaraat, she gets leprosy. So you oftentimes think of it in that way more than anything else. There's a wonderful idea. I don't know if I've shared it with the past about tzaraat. Um, Related to this, which is we think of it as a person who is physically beautiful, person who has utmost physical beauty, whatever, I don't know, model or actor or actress comes to your mind, and they wake up one morning, they have a pimple on the middle of the nose. Maybe this is more for teenagers than it is for, I don't know, 30-year-olds. And they look at the mirror and they're horrified. I look so terrible. I look so horrible. Look at what I look like. How can it be such a thing? Now, anybody else would say, physically, that face is so gorgeous. I would love to have a face that looked like that on the cover of magazines, et cetera, et cetera. But that person looks at their face and all they see is the big pimple on their nose or whatever it might be. And I heard this explanation from Yochanan Zweig. He says that's the problem with tzarats. That's the problem with lashon hara. Lashon hara, when you speak ill of another, you're not actually It's not lying. You're not saying something that's not true. What you're saying is something that's true. The problem is that you're taking something small and you're making it into something much, much bigger. For example, if if I would say about imagine if I would say about myself, I can only talk about myself. I would say Mark Hitler is cheap. Okay, Mark Hitler is cheap. So it might be true. I might be cheap. That might be the case. But somebody, and again, imagine I'm not Mark Hitler. Let's just make it a random person. Ploni Almoni is cheap. So Charlotte doesn't know Ploni Almoni. She's never met him before. And when she meets him, what is she going to know about him? He's cheap. And that might be true. He might be cheap. But he also might, but cheap is one of 100 things about him. There might be 99 great qualities about him, and he might be cheap, might be the 100th quality about him, which is not such a good one. But by my speaking Lashon Hara, what I'm doing is I'm taking something small, this dot here on my nose over here, and it's destroying my whole face, in a sense, to me. I'm looking and I'm saying, oh my God, I look so terrible. I can't go out. I'm crazy. I can't. How could I go out when I look so terrible? Well, you don't look terrible at all. You know, one little dot, big deal. Who cares? Nobody cares. They'll see it, and it'll be done with. That's what lashon hara does, said Rabbi Zweig, and that's why the punishment here is this punishment of tzara, because you're taking something, and it's not. It's not that it's not true. It's just that you are transforming the impression that somebody has about that person instead of this person who is kind and sweet and maybe generous with their time, if not their money, and responsible, diligent, and careful and considerate. Oh, yeah, they're also cheap. But now you're not going to think about all those other things because what did you say? You said Ploni Almoni is cheap. So Charlotte never met Ploni Almoni. Now she meets him for the first time. She says, "Oh, that's the cheap guy." Now, hopefully, he changes her impression. And she sees he's kind and diligent and careful and generous with his time and many other qualities. But that's what Lashon Hara does. And that's why that's the punishment. So the Torah here internalizes the inner moral spiritual issue, making them visible and communal, because what you have done is I have, by speaking ill of this person, I have sort of transformed what other people's interpretation or understanding of that person is. And so now when people look at me, they won't see me. They'll see that dot on my nose or whatever it might be. And that's his explanation. I think a very good explanation to try to understand Lashon Hara. And, the ultimate and Sarat, and the ultimate takeaway for us is, we have to be very careful with who we talk about and what we talk about. Much better to talk about ideas than it is to talk about people. So we'll stop with that for today for Tazria and early on into Mitzorah, and we'll continue more about it. My apologies if I feel like a little bit of a space cadet. I am a little tired and jet lagged, but great to be with you here today.